I'd like to introduce Temi Adamolekun, the founder and CEO of Pembroke PR, a boutique public relations firm here in San Francisco. Prior to founding her firm, she was director of communications for Natimius Design Restaurant Group, which includes restaurants like Flower and Water, Central Kitchen, Salou Maria, and Trick Dog, some of like the best San Francisco establishments. She was also served as the co-director of media for TEDx Presidio and is on the San Francisco Council for Vital Voices. Temi spent her early career in the Condé Nast contract publishing department in London, and she recently wrote her first children's book, which debuted as #1 on Amazon for the new children's book on the day of its release. And I happen to have a copy right here. It's called Your Special Voice. So thank you. I'll let you take it.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction, Katie. Okay, so I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So on the left, we have James Slattery. James is a senior coordinator of the Construction and Demolition Zero Waste team at San Francisco Environment Department. In this capacity, James leads a team of professionals working to develop safe, accountable, and circular solutions for building products. His work focuses on resource conservation, waste prevention, material recovery strategies, and program and policy development within the solid waste management and green building sectors. James has worked with SFE for over a decade and is excited to share details of San Francisco's journey towards zero waste. And in the middle, we have Kathryn Soter. Kathryn is the executive director of the GFDA. She most recently worked at Henry Built in business development and sales, and also had her own manufacturer's rep firm focused on furnishing for hospitality projects. Prior to pursuing a long-held interest in studying and working in the interior design industry, Kathryn spent 23 years at Condé Nast Media Group in an ad sales and marketing role for The New Yorker, Bon Appetit, Condé Nast Traveler, among others. When not planning the future of GFDA, Kathryn enjoys an aquatic life living on a floating home in Sausalito, which was made famous by the recently released Apple TV series, The Last Thing He Told Me, starring Jennifer Garner. And on my left here is Theo Hooker. Theo is the co-founder and COO of Cambium Carbon. With a background in sustainable agriculture and urban food production, his career to date has been in pursuit of cultivating regenerative systems that are good for people and the planet. Cambium uses technology to build local, scalable supply chains around salvaged material. They make it easy for wood-buying companies to source locally salvaged material from fallen trees. Theo wears many hats, but his work centers around connecting with designers, architects, wood product companies, and furniture companies to help them integrate this local supply stream into their projects and business. When not at the sawmill, wood shop, or meeting clients, Theo enjoys running on trails and practicing handstands.
Are you going to do one of those for us afterwards?
We'll see.
Okay, so to get the conversation started about a look ahead and why we should care, we need to understand the gravity and the urgency, and importantly, the potential for change. So we figured it'd be a good idea to start with some stats and data. So we're going to hand over to James. Could you share some of the key stats you've come across in your work that you feel would resonate with this audience?
Sure thing. Thank you. And thanks for the invite. This has been a really illuminating and inspiring morning thus far. It's actually a refreshing change from my normal circuit of solid waste transfer stations and demolition sites. So as mentioned, my name is James Slattery. I work with the Zero Waste Program team at the Environment Department here in San Francisco. Just a quick show of hands, who's heard of San Francisco Environment Department? Okay. We're a small but mighty city agency. Beyond the Zero Waste Program team that I'm on, we have teams focused in energy, transportation, toxics reduction, environmental justice, of course, climate change. And we're tasked with researching a vast variety of environmental problems. And on the other side of the research comes the way we intend to intervene with those issues. And they usually take the form of policy interventions, programs targeting raising awareness, outreach, technical assistance, and then a number of partnerships, grant programs with both private sector, nonprofits, for-profits. You know, this afternoon, I'm going to I have the honor of representing the work that falls at the intersection of green building and zero waste. I guess kind of makes me something akin to a hood ornament on a freight train. So what you're going to get as a result of this is a lot of trickle-down expertise. And I'll do my best to represent both of these program areas. Historically, before we started this cross-programmatic approach, the perspective here is heavily rooted in zero waste. It's one of the oldest program teams at the Department of the Environment, one of the first three. It's actually the program team that bought you the green bin that's now ubiquitous in San Francisco 25 years ago, now serves as the model for state policy that is now requiring every jurisdiction to collect food scraps. A lesser known policy was the 2006 Construction and Demolition Debris Recovery Ordinance, which prohibits and banned the direct landfilling of any discards from a construction project. Despite that strong law, we still send about 150,000 tons every year directly to landfill from construction and demolition projects. So that's 25% of what's going into the landfill is coming from the building industry. Better than most jurisdictions, that figure is usually closer to 50 to 60%. Armed with this information in 2018, we deepened our understanding with the years of research around climate change and evolved the approach towards zero waste to bring in those considerations of greenhouse gas impacts. And so beyond just lessening the tons going to landfill, we've refined that objective to now reduce the generation of waste by 15% by 2030. So what that means is not just cutting down what's going to landfill by 50% by 2030, but cutting down what's going to those blue bins for recycling, to those green bins for composting, because that's an ecosystem that carries with it enormous greenhouse gas impacts. And it also has impacts to a number of communities that are seeing those trucks travel through their neighborhoods, having landfills sited in their neighborhoods, recycling facilities sited in their neighborhoods, and it also comes with the impacts to ecosystems where the recycling is often downcycling, so we're still in a bit of a take, make, waste linear life cycle. And so in hindsight, it was good timing to refine that focus, because what we know now is there's the orange sky day we were talking about. The climate emergency is much more immediate and pressing. It became very real for everyone. We've got enormous disruption to global supply chains. We heard about that earlier, about driving the cost of materials up. And we recently have encountered and are struggling with some destabilization of key recycling markets that were normally just steadfast, whether it's concrete or wood. Those are sort of teetering now and causing us to send some of those materials that were once easily recyclable to landfill. Compounding to this is that the rate of development is not changing. Oxford University, Oxford Economics study showed the pace of development is projected to increase by 85% by 2030. And so what that translates to is basically the largest wave of urban development in human history. We're expected to add 2.4 trillion square feet of new floor area to the global building stock. And that's the equivalent of adding an entire New York City to the planet every month for the next 40 years. So what can we do? Moving from the doom and the gloom. This should be a straight line, highlighting the take, make, waste linear life cycle of how we build right now. And this is what the collaboration between the Green Building Program and the Zero Waste Program uses as sort of our guidepost to find where are the points of intervention that make sense. Could be a policy intervention, could be a program intervention, could be a partnership. There's no shortage of them, but I'm not going to be able to touch on most of these, but scattered about, you see a lot that speak to your community, from modular and prefabrication, life cycle assessments, design for disassembly, deconstruction, urban mining, salvage, specs based on environmental product declarations, building as material banks, surplus products coming off construction, tenant improvement, refresh and churn that is really common here in San Francisco. What we're really trying to do here is prevent the waste from being generated in the first place. So the ideal bin is the empty bin, like you see here. So at the top of that list, preventing waste, is practice of adaptive reuse. You'll find this in our climate action plan. We are on a course to start requirements around adaptive reuse. And look at the building we're in right now. This is case in point. It's a beautiful setting for an event like this. 50 years ago, I doubt they imagined this is what we'd be using the building for. You don't need to have a landmark designation, though, for adaptive reuse. You can go tour this building right now. This is 100 Van Ness here in San Francisco. It was like 26 or 30-something stories, 1,600 precast concrete panels. came off that building. They left every steel element from the core intact, reskinned it, and turned it into 400 residential units. I know this community is probably more interested with the residential focus, maybe less of the commercial construction, but this practice you can apply in your field as well, and it makes sense. The average single-family home, if you were going to demolish that structure, which tends to happen at the end of life, the amount of waste that's generated is equivalent to the same amount of waste, tonnage-wise, that family occupying that home would have generated over the course of 75 years. So 75 years of getting the banana peel in the green bin and the plastic bottle in the blue bin, all for naught in one swift day. They take that home down in a day. I want to kind of move away from the adaptive reuse. Really want to focus on some of the themes you heard earlier in the first panel around material reuse and how do we scale this up? What's preventing us? What are the challenges? What are the barriers? And how do we make this a common practice in your field? The lowest hanging fruit here is the surplus product coming off the job sites. So there's a web link there from a study we released just a few years ago. We worked with a team of architects, contractors, designers, owners, really trying to understand how is surplus product being generated. So by surplus, I mean this is waste that is in box, pristine, never opened, purchased, never installed. This is low-hanging fruit. We know the specs of the product. It doesn't have that sort of second-hand branding to it. We just need to get it in the hands of folks who want it and who need it, and they're out there. So this is a study that I encourage you all to take a look at. Not only does it look at the places to intervene and prevent the generation of surplus product, but it also has a pathway for how you can start to plan to redistribute those products. This is really kind of the heart of what I wanted to bring here today. The main drive of our work for the last couple of years is our efforts to scale up material reuse of building products and materials. And we're taking a three-pronged approach. What you don't see on here is the policies that are being developed, whether it's deconstruction, adaptive reuse, mandatory thresholds to reuse product, or mandatory thresholds to divert away from landfill and divert away from recycling and divert into the reuse markets. Those are all being cooked up right now, but we realized that the policies were bound to fail because of the lack of infrastructure that could actually facilitate successful implementation of any of those policies. So this is where a lot of our effort is right now. The first thing we're working on is strengthening the connectivity of the network between those who have the supply of product and those who need it. One group I'll flag right now is we work closely with the All for Reuse Alliance. This is a gathering of the largest portfolio owners in the Bay Area. Your Googles, your Salesforce, your Wells Fargo, JLL, Hudson Properties, all of them very much leaning into how they can start to do more with reuse at a commercial scale and refine their practices for the way that they build and refresh their portfolios. We just launched this month, and I'll have a couple slides that go into this, a virtual marketplace that is specifically designed for making the connection between suppliers and receivers much easier and helping overcome some of the challenges of reuse at scale. Those challenges tend to boil down to time and space barriers. You know, the project that has the supply of product is not always synced up timeline-wise with the next project or two projects that are going to reintegrate that. And so a virtual marketplace, in theory, has the potential to do more sophisticated handoffs of product. And so we could talk about that a little bit more, but you can't get away from the need for that intermittent lie-down space, the physical storage, and we just do not have it in the Bay Area. We have some resellers here, long-standing, successful pioneers. You might know their names, Urban Ore, Omega Salvage, Building Resources, down the peninsula, Placemakers, Green Links in Sonoma. They're all at capacity, all of them. And they're really designed to handle residential material. I know that's for this audience, but they've reached capacity and they can't expand. If they wanted to lease a warehouse or even a bare lot, they would be competing against, say, Uber, who can bid up the cost of a bare lot to $99 a square foot from $20 a square foot. Talking about Green Links in Sonoma, if they wanted to expand into a warehouse, they're up against the cannabis industry, who's doing the same. What we've been doing is looking at how we can repurpose government-owned assets, whether they're owned by the state, owned by regional authorities, or owned by the city, and make those parcels available for far below fair market value, if not darn near free, and install for-profit operators, nonprofit operators that will facilitate the storage and handoff and redistribution of these materials, make it shoppable, a dependable source of product where you can start designing around that, knowing, yeah, there are 40 hollow core doors that are in stock that I could put into a design plan. So yesterday we just held, oh, thank you, that's okay. I've totally departed from all the notes that I've been typing away for the last night. Let's just go off the cuff. So yesterday we held the third meeting of our deconstruction technical advisory group. Also in our climate action plan is to have a deconstruction mandate in place by 2025. We're doing the chicken and the egg thing here. We're trying to build the infrastructure before putting the requirements on, because we know they'll land flat on their face if that's not there. Deconstruction, to be clear, is a practice of disassembling a structure to make product available for reuse. The end game is reuse. If we don't have the infrastructure to facilitate reuse, what we've done is driven up the cost of the project, the timeline of the project, and all you've really done is neatly organize the waste coming off the project. It's really about the infrastructure. They work hand in hand. It's almost like a double helix of DNA. The practice of deconstruction and disassembly syncs up with reuse. This is the end game. So what you see on the left is how it starts, the intermittent lie-down storage, and then the refinished product. By the way, this is a disruption to the take, make, waste linear life cycle, which we call recycling of wood waste. What we do with urban wood waste right now, and we call it recycling, is we burn it in cogeneration plants. We use the heat to turn turbines, and we sell the kilowatt hours as renewable energy. And the state gives us credit and says you've recycled that wood. If we can't get it in the cogen plants, because we have 100 million dead trees in the national forest right now, and the cogen plants are being incentivized to burn the trees rather than the urban wood, and they're being guaranteed a purchase price of that kilowatt hour to burn trees, not timber, not 2x4s. If you can't get it in the cogen plant, what you do is you chip it, you dye it, you turn it into mulch. And again, it's one way. So this is a complete disruption to the take, make, waste linear life cycle. Problem is, most of the structures we're disassembling right now were never designed to be disassembled. And it's only going to get worse as we start to crack into the building stock that came online in the 80s and the 90s and the aughts. And we got away from screws and we got into glues, we got spray foam insulations. We have the composite materials that are in there. So this is for your community to think about. How can you lean into it, start designing for disassembly, start speccing those products, start speccing those techniques, get back to the screws, get away from the glues. I already talked about what we're doing to bolster infrastructure, but most specifically, we have a plot owned by SF Port down in the Bayview. We just put out an RFP for it, and it was awarded to a long-standing material reseller. We've had one there for 25 years, but we're going to turn over the operation, and they are really leaning into how they can scale up material reuse on that plot. We're also working with Caltrans, the state's largest real estate owner, property owner. We have an arrangement with them where they're willing to carve out a couple of parcels. There's actually a legislative pressure on Caltrans right now from San Francisco that says they have to take 10 parcels a year. When I say a parcel, think about underneath the freeway on-ramps, some of that's 6 stories high, 4 stories high, some of that has warehouses with utilities piped into it. They have to reposition and repurpose 10 of those plots for community and environmental benefits. The pressure is for them to make it into open space rather than a parking lot, or to take some of the pressure off some of the more pressing crises that we're dealing with around food scarcity and the unsheltered. But we're working with Caltrans so that they'll reposition some of those parcels for us so we can install a operator, nonprofit, for-profit, who will do the redistribution, the storage and redistribution of building products at scale. And they're committed to drive the cost of that parcel down. You know, this is 10 to 40,000 square feet. They'll charge us $1 a year. This is the online exchange we just launched in partnership with Rheaply. It's a clean tech company, went live this month. It's another chicken and egg situation. I'm excited to share it with you on the next slide. This is kind of what it's looking like right now. We do have product on it. There's pallets of Treasure Island reclaimed pine for sale. Some of the stuff's for free. And the link here is at the top now. Again, it's intended to be a B2B type of platform, only for the building industry. You can shop it, and the product, the inventory can be shopped and sorted and filtered by CSI master format lists, so you can look exactly for the products that you're looking for. Chicken and egg, though, we're building the supply right now. So coming back to the network we're working with in the All for Reuse family, getting a lot of high quality product on that platform is key for us right now. But you can go on there now, view it, shop it. The idea would be we need a lot more product on there. It's kind of like a cold open of a new restaurant. So stick with us, hang in there. I'm going to stop talking right now because I want to get the rest of the panel pulled in here. But I think the high note I would like to leave on somewhat optimistically is there's really no shortage of opportunities for folks to intervene, folks like yourself and your community to intervene. And I'm happy to talk about as many of these as you'd like. And that is my contact info if you would want to follow up and reach out afterwards. But those are, I think, some of the stats that you were looking for.
Thank you. That was a lot of really useful information, and I think it just really helps set the scene in terms of context. I think there were two things in particular you said that I noticed created a visible and audible response from the audience. The first was when you said the current rate of development is one new New York every month for the next 40 years. And the second thing you said that created really strong response was the demolition of a single family home creates the same amount of tonnage, waste, as 75 years of a family living in that home. Because I think those two things are so easy for everyone to visualize and understand. So it definitely created a really strong response. So thank you very much for sharing all that information. You also referenced dead trees, which keys us up really nicely to ask Theo the first question for him. And Theo, when we spoke last week, you shared some information about what you learned in your company's initial assessment of the San Francisco canopy and the urban wood reuse potential. Could you speak to that?
Absolutely, and thanks for the great detail and sharing, James. So a little bit more background on Cambium. We work kind of across the disposal system, particularly around wood from fallen city trees, to make that accessible in largely a lot of the same ways that James mentioned, that without leveling up the awareness and the advocacy around the use of the material, it just becomes a more expensive, neatly organized piece of waste, which I think was really, really well put. And so part of our company works with cities to help understand their wood reuse policies, system, and pathways moving forward. So we have a current pilot project in Philadelphia that's actually working with the city to store and start to sort their material, a local workforce development organization to train folks to operate sawmills and process that material into lumber. And then we're bringing in private buyers for that specified material. And how we're trying to scale that is with our work in San Francisco, starting with a reuse assessment, basically looking at the canopy of the city, what species are available, what's the rate of trees that are coming down, and what are the best avenues, local partners, local initiatives that we can tie into to elevate that work and create a pathway and a program for reuse moving forward. So we just completed sort of our phase 1 assessment with the city of San Francisco, and just for everyone's distinction, we worked with the Department of Urban Forestry, not necessarily tied in with the environment work, even though there's so much overlap, and I think that's a theme that I'll touch on or that will come up later, that there are a lot of groups working at this in different ways, but might not be talking in the right way or might not have the right people at the right table at the right time. But the SF Urban Forestry, they manage over 125,000 trees just in San Francisco. And again, that's just one department. And they remove around 2,000 trees per year. And that overall could have over around 50 metric tons of carbon stored just from that group with those trees. And not all of those are perfect, ready to be reused, but imagine if that could be tied into other groups' work, other municipalities in the Bay Area. You start to look at this picture on a systems level across a region, and you see some really exciting opportunities for reuse.
So I think, hearing from James and Theo gives us all a really good sense of the scale of the problem. And so I want us to take a look at why we should care. We're all here today as we're all collectively in an industry where we're stewards of the built environment. So this is a great opportunity to share that information, to exchange that information, and just to see what a difference we can make. We're living in the reality of climate change. I mean, I think a lot of people here, if not most people, probably saw pictures of Tahoe this season. The velocity and volume of the snow that we saw when we were out there this season, I've never seen anything like it. It looked like a sandstorm, but it was snow. There were days where it'd be an inch an hour for 72 hours. And we also saw crazy flooding in San Francisco. I'm sure many people here in the design industry got called out to help clients that had flooded basements, lots of trees, got knocked over by the crazy wind. So we're very much living through the reality of climate change. And one of the things that we all spoke about when we had our conversation last week was the key message here is it's not too late. There's always a lot that we can do. So we just really want to talk to this. So Kathryn, could you speak to this? Could you share a bit about why you feel we should care?
We're all in this room probably familiar with the Hilton San Francisco on Union Square, right? It's about a 2,000 room hotel. It's the largest in the city. For the amount of furniture that we throw away every day, we could fill that hotel 30 times. So that's why we should care. You've heard a lot of talk between these two gentlemen about the downstream waste problem, but what doesn't get enough attention and why the reason for the GFDA's existence is to talk about the upstream, which is designers making decisions, contractors, architects making choices that can mitigate the downstream waste problem. I like to say, just because we know how to put out fires doesn't mean we should start another one. So that's really why we should care. I think we covered it in the first panel really nicely as well, but we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we are collaborating with all partners that have a vested interest in making the right decisions early in the stage, because you can actually attribute about 30% of waste to decisions that were made before the building even gets started. That's the important point I want everybody to take away from in this room, is that if you plan properly, Jennifer brought that up very nicely this morning, planning properly, knowing your resources, educating your client and working with other partners and supporting companies that are doing the right thing just only makes the process better, and also enables more opportunity for other technologies to help us along the way, etc. So the idea is we're all part of the problem, and that means we're all part of the solution.
So we've spoken a lot about prevention, and Theo, I wanted to ask you if you could share some more information about the context of reuse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I gave a little bit of a snapshot of our work here in San Francisco, but zooming out across the country, 36 million trees fall in cities each year. And most of that ends up in a landfill, turned into mulch. That, combined with some of the redevelopment that James mentioned, that these problems are only going to accelerate. And then on top of that, if you look at some of the, our urban areas that have green access, parks, trees, things like that, they're not shared equally. If you overlap a map of current green space in cities with districts and communities that are redlined in the 1900s, they match up pretty well. So when we think about reuse, it's really focusing on the regenerative side of things. So how can we take this massive amount of waste that's ending up in its lowest value form, or actually even costing people money in cities to dispose of that material, channel that to local businesses, local communities through wood shops, sawmills, kind of the networks that we work with on the supply side, and then to folks like yourself on the design, on the build, on the fabrication side, who can pull that market into the reuse. And then part of Cambium's work, 15% of our profits go back into community tree planting in those communities, with a target on those that haven't had or have been left out of those conversations. And so I think when we think about reuse, really trying to be mindful of the end of life, to create a positive feedback loop. I think some of the challenges we face on the climate side, we see these negative feedback loops, or that like kind of the growing snowball effect. And how do we build something, use those principles, but in a positive direction?
We can see the recurring themes of prevention and reuse, and that's something that I really want everyone to think about through the course of the day and to really take away with them. There's a lot to be said about honoring the history of a home, and when we think about all the great, like, beautiful cities and wild places like London, like Paris, like New York, it's the historical architecture that makes these cities visually what they are. We spoke about it when we spoke last week. I'd read about, I think it was in the New York Times maybe like 30, 40 years ago, there was a piece that someone had written about how your house chooses you. You don't choose the house chooses you. It's a really important emotional connection. People can form with the home. And I think we saw in the last panel, there was some conversation, I think Dave mentioned it, about the storytelling piece. And I think this is something that we can all engage in a bit more, just like the stories that we choose to tell ourselves about the spaces that we're living in. If your house is choosing you, maybe as interior designers and architects, you can encourage your clients to choose a house that's slightly closer to the end result they're going for. So that way they don't feel they want to change everything on the inside because their start point was a little bit closer to their goal. And especially when we hear stats like what James shared about the current pace of development, it's just not sustainable. So James, you had some interesting information about the current pace and rates of construction, but you also spoke about the Portland deconstruction ordinance and the San Antonio deconstruction ordinance. Could you speak to that as well?
Yes. So first in the nation deconstruction requirement came out of Portland. I think it was in 2016. When we talk about deconstruction, a lot of the drivers for is it possible, can we require it, what will it take, they're hyper local. And so for Portland, it was a response to the kind of like what you're saying, new owners coming in and not loving the home that they had purchased. That doesn't speak to me, but the design that I have does, so let's knock it down and build the next one. And the existing community in Portland pushed back on that, which was basically saying you're tearing apart the fabric of our community, and we want to put a stop to it. And Portland's a timber town. A lot of those homes had old growth lumber in there, heading off to the landfill or to be mulched. And so you're talking about honoring the materials. You know, these are 600, 500, 400-year-old trees that were felled to create those structural beams. The timbers themselves are superior to anything you're going to purchase today that's 30 years old and coming out of Home Depot. Superior in the form of the structural integrity, the fungal resistant, the rot resistant, fire resistant. So they tapped into that. So what happened here in the Bay Area under the leadership of EPA Region 9, who also has Portland under their scope, they came down and convened what was named the Bay Area Deconstruction Working Group and invited folks like my department and others. It quickly became a national working group that would meet quarterly. And it was convened in response to say, look, if Portland can do it, the Bay Area can do it. Palo Alto actually was the second in the nation, and their deconstruction ordinance is, I think, a year or two underway. They're very similar to the Bay Area. There's others that have followed. Baltimore has an approach to it. Detroit has an approach to it. They all took different tactics. For Detroit, it became about human health. And for them, it was the demolition happens, the dust cloud travels so far. We talk about carbon footprints, which I really appreciated from the first panel. We could get into that a little bit more, but I think what gets lost when you think about the carbon footprint is what's also attached to the carbon more often than not is something like arsenic, mercury, lead. The human health narrative became the driver in Detroit, protecting the community there. For Baltimore, it was blocks of condemned row houses, also with old growth timber in them, beautiful brick. The city owned those homes because they were all abandoned at that point, queued up for demolition. And so they didn't have the problem we have here in Palo Alto, which is cheap lie-down space. The materials are already stored in the structures. And so their approach went, we'll disassemble it once we queue up the order for the brick and the board. And their whole program became, the main driver was to combat recidivism. It was a work program. And they put local hands to work to disassemble these structures and feed a supply chain that was going to use the timbers and the brick out of it. San Francisco and the Bay Area, we have some unique hyper-local issues ourselves. One of them, we already talked about, one was the lack of cheap real estate to store anything. The other one is the culture of churn, speculative real estate. This happens in the residential sector and it happens in the commercial sector as well. Here in the city, we have a culture of startup investment, boom or bust. So you get a company come in, commercialize, lease how many tens of thousands of square feet, and within 3 years, it's boom or bust. But everything they installed was brand new, from the sub-zero freezers and refrigerators that are pumping the on-tap kombucha, whatever is in there. And, you know, boom or bust, they leave it all behind because they're on to the next thing, or they're out. And so the next tenant comes in and says, this is not our pallet. We don't want anything to do with this. Gut it all and start over. So we're dealing with commercial. It's not full structural demolition when we think about deconstruction. It's the partial soft demolition, the renovations, the churn. Same thing's happening with the residential sector, though, and we've touched on that. So we're coming at it from unique perspective in San Francisco, but I think the takeaway there was it is possible to slow down the take, make, waste linear life cycle of build it and demolish it. I mean, this is terrible because it's not even the end of life, the end of useful life. It's just, I don't like it. It's not for me. And so when we talk about things like honoring those materials, I've talked to some of these folks. Speaking of Tahoe, a couple years ago for me, I could not deal with the drive anymore, the traffic that was going there. So we started to point the car north and go to Shasta, smaller mountain, and you start to talk to the timber towns up there, the former lumberjacks. And when they heard what was happening, their jaws would hit the ground, you know. Yeah, a 400-year-old tree was felled, but that was a labor of love that we did. That built our community. And we built San Francisco with those timbers. Mill Valley is called Mill Valley for a reason. And so when we come in and we say, that's not for me, knock it down, demolish it, you're dishonoring not just the living creature that had to give its life up, but the communities that actually provided that supply chain for you. The takeaway here was, yeah, it's possible. Let's all get to work and figure out how we can do this. And so for us, the deconstruction initiative is so important that it's in our climate action plan as a city. We have a directive to have a deconstruction mandate in place by 2025. I mentioned we're through meeting 3 of 5 with a technical advisory group to figure out how to do it, because for us in San Francisco, these tenant improvements and alterations, the permits outpace a full demolition permit 16 to 1. We have to figure out how to require deconstruction on the refresh, on the partial, on the alteration, on the tenant improvement, not just on the structural demolition.
So Kathryn, over to you. We'd like to hear from you a bit more about how you feel we should interact with sustainability in design.
Well, I think to make sure that lower waste is mitigated really does require all stakeholders to have and embrace low waste practices together, as everybody along the construction supply chain has to weigh in and contribute. We are really at a point where it's very easy to point fingers in the opposite directions. I talk to a lot of architects who say, yeah, but you know, the client told me to rip this out. So we have to educate clients too in a gentle way, but the more affluent they are tends to be, unfortunately, the more wasteful in some respects, because it's easy just to make a decision and a change. And we have to figure out a way as designers, architects, even the contractors involved, to make sure that clients understand the impact of their decisions too. So we have, at the GFDA, we have resources. We are going to continue to build more with your help on how to bring up those conversations with clients early on, to get them embracing the practices that we know we can do, and then finding your team. And we have some of that in a little booklet that we're giving you today, and more on our website. The biggest source of, as I mentioned earlier, that about 30% of waste you can point to the design process. And of that, the largest contributor is rework, change orders. And so what does that say? That says mistakes have happened, people have changed minds, ordering problems, just not planning properly. There's so many tools out there that we have to measure and evaluate how much we should order to not be wasteful. Do we have to have something be so complex that it requires excess material that now doesn't have another life? It's about really, again, flipping the switch and thinking about it more carefully, and bringing along your partners and insisting upon it too. We have to now tell our clients that this is what we do, and we have to be more thoughtful about it.
Thank you for that. So I think it's really important for everyone to really take on board the fact that there is so much that we can change, and you yourself can choose what you want to change, when you want to change, and how you want to change. The education piece is really important, just for ourselves, and also how we choose to share that information that we learn with our friends, with our families, with our clients, and just to really encourage people as much as possible to make more mindful, long-term choices. So I'd like to thank everyone on the panel for sharing all the information. There was so much information, I wish I could have taken notes, but we'd like to...
We have it on camera, so you can get it later.
Thank you. So we'd like to open the floor to questions. Please raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you as quick as we can.
My discussion's with Theo. My background is in landscape architecture and planning, both for commercial and cities mainly. And it's interesting that you mentioned that there's so many trees removed or down with weather, but at the same time, my understanding is that in San Francisco, we actually have a relatively low canopy coverage. So I heard you say that there's efforts to increase that, especially in communities that need more canopy coverage. Do you see enough awareness in landscape architects in the opportunity to reuse the city canopy for site furnishing and other landscape elements? And if so, like, who are those folks like really pushing the envelope on that?
I would say it's starting to grow in momentum, that more and more people are aware that, oh, if we have to remove X number of trees from a property or through redevelopment, how can we, tie into a deconstruction or a reuse side of that? I think in a similar way, there are a lot of steps that have to happen from the initial tree arborist report that happens. What are the species? What can they be used for? What are the sizes? And a challenge with trees is that you don't really know the quality until you can take it down and saw it open and look inside. But basically, based on the species and the size and the condition of the tree, you can make a good estimate of what that could actually be used for. So short answer, I would say it's growing more and more. That's part of our projects that we work on, are basically working with on the removal of trees and helping coordinate that side, and also just providing, the idea that in an ideal world, trees come down on a property and could be automatically reused on site. If that is not possible, the idea of kind of contributing to the bank of local reuse, that can your trees be part of the solution, and also if those trees don't work, could you pull from another other material that we have on hand? And we're seeing some exciting opportunities in thermal modification of material. So taking, out in Baltimore on the East Coast, we have a ton of red oak. For the designers, red oak is not really in right now. But we have a ton of it, and so it's really kind of this wasted material, and through this thermal modification process, we can turn it into a durable outdoor material. So you're looking to replace your tropical hardwoods or your composites or your engineered material with this completely natural salvaged material that performs, on the same level. So trying to look and promote and increase awareness on that side of things as well. But thank you.
This question is for James. I'm a little bit curious about your website, Rheaply. Am I saying that correctly? Is it Rheaply.com? You just connect the buyer and the seller, and it's up to them to essentially connect and get the supplies over, or do you kind of have a transportation service as well?
Why don't you tell them where you're from?
I am from Remove. I believe some of you saw our pamphlets. We operate here in San Francisco. We do about 150, 200 pickups here in San Francisco, and we essentially participate in the circular economy. So we resell all the furniture that we collect, and we sell them outside.
Thanks for the question. So it's not our website. So San Francisco Environment Department received a grant from the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. And the grant was for the purpose of building a digital marketplace to scale up the reuse of materials from the building sector. We repackaged that grant award and sent it over to our partner Rheaply. That's the clean tech company based out of, I think they're in Chicago, yeah. And they had been working with digital marketplaces for a while. They were born out of a laboratory, literally. The CEO founder was working in Northwestern University, flush with all sorts of laboratory equipment, pipettes, microscopes, and also seeing just a few blocks down clinics and schools that were desperate for those materials. And Gary Cooper, I believe is his name, created this platform to connect those two communities so that if you have supply, you can put it on this platform, you could donate it, you could list it for sale, for donation, and then their job was now start to recruit in the community, of communities that need these materials. And so that was how they kicked things off. That spun out in the during the pandemic, if you remember when all construction was shut down and everyone was desperate for an N95 mask, but every construction project had boxes of them stored away, because that's what they would wear on a typical day, they spun that platform into a PPE exchange for the city of Chicago. They layered on an equity lens, and in this sense what we're saying with equity is expanding the access to materials and resources. And so if you were a black-owned business, nonprofit, you had priority access to this exchange to get the N95s that were being supplied on from the construction companies who couldn't wear them because they weren't allowed to build. That marketplace is spun out to a number of different avenues. They work with universities at large, they work with the Department of Defense, and they read the tea leaves. They were like, okay, we're seeing what's happening in the country with resource conservation, pushes for deconstruction, the lack of infrastructure, we're all in. So they came to the table to build something that hadn't existed before. It's their website, it's their platform. And it's designed to be a B2B model, so it's that way it won't become Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, where you're seeing any other type of widget in the marketplace. It is about building materials. So they do play gatekeeper to a degree. While you can view it and shop it, not anyone can put material on it. You have to go through the Rheaply onboarding process. So if you want to put product on, you pay for a license, and they're, I think a license is like $800 bucks. It's probably under $1,000, $800 a year. With that comes some, bells and whistles. It'll let you know the tons you preserved from going to landfill. They'll convert the tons into greenhouse gases conserved. So if you have ESG goals and things you want to promote and market and brand, you now get the data to do that. They also spun out a component of it that is an upgrade model, from the $800 fee. And that's for the larger, I think, contractors and developers who have really vast portfolios. So if you see the French cranes in the city, who they're talking to is the Webcors, the Skanskas, and so that they can manage the movement and redistribution of product within their own portfolios for this purpose. So they're taking surplus product or deconstructed product and moving it around. They could also tap in partner contractors and developers as well and shift it to their market. We just kicked this off. Our role at the Environment Department is kind of why I'm here. I'm just going to let you know, is to really expand the awareness that this thing is here and try to drive some usership to it. That's not the only reason I was here. It was an easy sell. It was a free lunch. It was a free lunch. It was really, I think it was Marcus from Gensler who pulled me in, and I think Marcus might be on a late this afternoon. And so Marcus was like, this community's desperate for this. They want to lean in. They want to do right. They just need the tools and the ability to do that. So if you can get out there and start promoting it. So Marcus has been doing more road showing of this platform than I do.
I have a question for you on that Rheaply thing. How do you localize it? Because isn't it more costly to or worse for the environment if we're shipping something from Baltimore to San Francisco?
It is theoretically, but studies would show that the displacement of relying on that virgin make waste ecosystem. So when you stretch out that spaghetti string and you're talking about extraction of materials in a global supply chain, the cell phone you're holding took 6 continents to produce. That supply chain is 6 continents wide. And so when you start extracting virgin materials, taking mountaintops down, removing forests to mine the metals, get the lumber, get that hardwood out of the tropical forest. It doesn't matter if you took that board feet that was salvaged in Portland and sent it to Baltimore at that point. It is going to offset what we would call embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is the greenhouse gases that are generated with every phase of that linear supply chain. So you've got to extract it. You've then got to ship it so it could be processed. That's got to then get shipped somewhere else for manufacturing. That's got to get shipped somewhere else for construction, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's the reduction of the embodied carbon. What we've done a great deal of success in recent years with green building is focused on operational carbon. Switch out your lights, switch out your low flow toilets and faucets. So the next frontier is the embodied carbon. And so that's what I led with adaptive reuse. A building like this, not only did the beams trap carbon in them because it was a living creature that put the CO2 into what would become the board feet, but if you went and chipped it and disposed it, that carbon gets released back to the atmosphere. But what you've done is you've banked in this building all the carbon that came with that supply chain. That's what we mean by a building as a material bank. Just leave it in there. Do not touch it, because starting that process over generates all those emissions to date. If you want, reach out to me. I'm trying to do my best to represent the colleagues in my department who are closer to this dashboard than I am right now. We have a team that can help you with technical assistance, because what will have to happen is you have to figure out how to change your practices to optimize the value of that platform. For example, if you were going to do a commercial tenant improvement, you probably need to start working with your project manager or managers to start taking photographs and speccing the material and getting it on the exchange long before you even go to head for the building permit that's going to let you to start knocking down walls. That's a practice that has to change. That's where my camp comes in. Rheaply's the platform developer and the designer. We would be the one helping with the technical assistance and the marketing of it. But it is set to take off. There's a Bay Area stakeholder. You probably recognize their logo if I put it up. It's got bright primary colors in it. And they want to sponsor that marketplace. They're all in. They want to sponsor it. So, and add some of their muscle behind it.
And I think just one of the key points there is that right now we might not be able to keep everything within San Francisco or everything in Baltimore, but these types of marketplaces and the access is the future, where we look ahead 10, 20 years, and we could imagine where every major city, every major area has this reuse system.
And there's 6 other cities that actually had their own materials marketplace. They were powered individually by other tech providers. Rheaply bought them all. And so they are now the machinery behind them all. It's Ohio, it's Washington State, it's Illinois. And so that connectivity, like that you're speaking to, is happening already.
So on the Rheaply website, is it materials, building materials, not furniture?
It's both. Both. You, FF&E, furniture, fixtures, equipment. Yep.
Hi there. Is there any pushback from furniture companies, from building suppliers like Home Depot or those kinds of places that would be selling you the products that, you know?
It's actually kind of happening in the other direction. We're finding the manufacturers are putting product on there. They're under pressure to actually fulfill the commitments in their ESG models that have been falling on their face when it comes to their take-back programs, and so they are trying to figure out a way to fold into that infrastructure. I don't know if this is the question that was being asked a second ago, but I did hear earlier, there's a lot of questions around deconstruction. I want to give some low-hanging fruit to this group. The way deconstruction works in this area right now, you're right, tax deductions do drive it, or at least help it along. But the parties that do the deconstruction, they will come to your project and do a salvage assessment for free. For free. They will walk through the structure and let you know which products have a viable reusability market waiting for them. But what you could start to do with your clients is require that before you demolish anything. We will require the free salvage assessment walkthrough. Then you could lean into the next conversation, which is maybe selling the tax deduction angle, pulling on the environmental narrative that might tug on some heartstrings, or whatever it may be to get them from just becoming aware, oh, this doesn't have to go to landfill, doesn't have to go to recycling. Whatever that next step is to push it over the top, figure that out. But low-hanging fruit, just start speccing that into your projects. You have to do the salvage assessment before we move forward.
And for those of you, I think we mentioned this earlier this morning, but another plug, this little booklet that's at the door is just we're giving away, but there's like some checklists including the deconstruction kind of financial benefits. It keeps coming up today. So
And in the front page, there is a from Remove, right?
Oh,
yes.
absolutely. Yeah. There's also a member perks.
Member perk.
We work with Remove and a few other great vendors, so make sure you check that out too.
So everybody here can get a discount from some of our resupply companies. So they were generous to offer those to this audience. So make sure you take advantage of it. Tell them we sent you.
And just sharing our perspective on the furniture company and the manufacturer side of things is that I think we've found that folks are excited to learn more about this ultra sort of hyper, more like holistically sustainable product, at least on the urban wood and the salvaged side of things, where, you know, if they're using FSC, oh, how could they go one step further? You know, instead of coming from a forest in, you know, Canada or, you know, even North America, how could they use something in their backyard? Kind of an opt-in option for them rather than, you know, what would seem kind of like an exclusionary thing. But no, like, hey, you're part of this solution as well. And so we've seen great feedback on that side.
I can't stop talking because this is so exciting. I didn't even know GFDA existed until about a week ago, and I know everyone in this room has so much to teach me. Thank you. I'm so deeply grateful for the panel. Just direct this comment to all of you. I just realized that it's not about expanding our awareness. I think we almost have to kind of reinvent the language so that it's actually expanding consciousness, and that we have to be not afraid to talk to and connect to the heart and the spirit and soul of everyone that's involved in this whole process. So it's really not about the logistics. So Temi, I'm kind of curious to ask you how we could actually, start doing that. And when James talked about honoring the material, in fact, I was reading something last weekend, and this quote that just popped into my head. A Native American, she said, when you talk about natural resources, we call them our relatives. and we have to talk about it, and we have to think about it in this manner so that everybody can sort of step back and see our relationship to our nature. So this is really not sounding like a built environment alone, but our radically transforming our place and our role in the entire nature and natural world. We're part of it. We are not the ones who are just trying to extract value from a whole field of forest.
Thank you for that. No, that's a really interesting point. Thank you, James. But just to respond to what you're saying quickly, it is a storytelling piece, because that is how people remember things. That is how people create an emotional connection with something. So that is what it comes down to. Raising awareness, increasing consciousness. It's all about storytelling. It's the stories we hear, the stories we learn, the stories we remember, and the stories we choose to tell ourselves. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for me from the panel today. There's a lot of information, which is always really useful, and that can inform your storytelling. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much for the level of engagement, and we'll see you at lunch.